The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no fuller on earth could bleach them. Then Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were conversing with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He hardly knew what to say. They were so terrified. Then a cloud came, casting a shadow over them. From the cloud came a voice, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone but Jesus alone with them. As they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them not to relate what they had seen to anyone, except when the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus.
It's often fun to put yourself into the scene in Scripture and maybe even replace one of the main characters with yourself. Today would be an interesting day to do that if you were Abraham. He'd be calling upon you to do what he asked Abraham to do. But we need to understand what Abraham was actually asked. Abraham? Yes, God. They had this little rapport because God had talked to him many times already before anyway. So he was used to hearing Jesus speak, or God speak. And God said, "Abraham, I need you to do me a favor again." "Okay, what is it?" "You know that son I promised you, Isaac?" "Yes, God." "I need you to do one more thing with Isaac. I need you to take him up a mountain and sacrifice him to me." "Really? I'm almost 100 years old. You gave me a son, and now you want me to take him and sacrifice him?" That's what I would say. But Abraham just did as he was requested. He did what God asked of him. In our reading today, our first reading, there's a huge section skipped. We hear just that command, and all of a sudden, they're in place, ready to go. But we really need to focus on that entire story, because Abraham was not the only one who needed to give a yes. What about Sarah? When this conversation was taking place, she was probably in the tent, getting things ready for dinner or lunch, whatever it happened to be. And all of a sudden, Abraham comes in and said, "We're going on a little journey. God has asked another thing of me." And her reply was, "Again?" "Yes, again." "What is it this time?" "Well, don't know quite how to tell you this, but God is asking for Isaac's life." As a mother, what do you think her reaction would have been? One of, "Go ahead, have a nice day, see you later"? Or would she have struggled a little bit, or a lot? Would she have begged them not to go? We don't know. It's not recorded. And then there's Isaac himself. Probably a young teenager at the time. His father, elderly, saying, "Come on, we're going on a journey. There's some wood, pick it up, bring all this stuff with you. You carry it, I'm too old." And on the journey they go. And if we read the section that's missing, we'll hear some conversation between Isaac and Abraham. Some discussion about what is to occur. Isaac never questions why or what they're going to do. He trusts God just as Abraham does. God will provide, don't worry. God will provide, don't worry, Abraham kept on saying. And then we pick up the scene again today. The altar is prepared. The wood is on the altar. And we see Isaac already on this altar, about to be sacrificed. As a young teen with an elderly father, I hardly doubt that Abraham had the strength to hold him, put him up there, tie him in place, and not let him go. It had to have been a yes from Isaac also. Willingly getting on that altar after his father had explained what God had asked. He had to have climbed up and laid there. And as his father was ready to bring his hand down to take his life, never questioning it according to what we read, 3 people giving an ultimate yes to their God, willing to sacrifice the most important thing that they had. For Abraham and Sarah, their son. For Isaac, his very self. And just as Abraham is about ready to bring down his hand, God says, no, never mind. Stop right where you are. God said, don't worry. I understand your devotion to me. I understand what lengths you are willing to go. And because of it, you will be greatly rewarded. God had other plans. Isaac was never meant to be the ultimate sacrifice for our faith. God had other plans. He already knew what was going to happen someday. And just as Abraham promised Isaac God would provide, as Isaac got off that altar of sacrifice, they looked over, and out of nowhere was a ram caught in the thicket. God provided the sacrifice that day. But again, the life of an animal, the life of Isaac, would never have been enough to redeem all humanity. God knew that, and God had a plan. And as we hear in St. Paul's letter to the Romans today, that plan was Jesus himself. Jesus coming down to be that ultimate sacrifice, the one that through his death could bring about our redemption. God had the plan to sacrifice not someone else's son, but his own. Jesus came to earth knowing that plan. He grew up somewhere along the way realizing that plan. And as he undertook his ministry, the plan became also real. When we get to Palm Sunday and we hear of that sacrifice, we find Jesus willingly going to the sacrifice, just as Isaac did long before. The Father asked something of him. And just as Isaac obeyed Abraham, Jesus obeyed the Father. In one of our Gospels, we hear of Jesus in agony in the garden, asking for it to be taken away. God said, no, we can't do that. And Jesus willingly climbed his altar of sacrifice, the cross, for us. The one sacrifice that could redeem us all. Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac, and Jesus all set the example for us. How are we to do this? How are we to live a Christian life? Our life is about sacrifice. Not to the point of dying on a cross for most of us. For most of us, it's simply giving of ourselves, being of service to others, thinking about ourselves last and others first. That's the Christian way. It's not always easy, but it's simple in comparison to what Abraham was asked what was asked of Isaac and what Jesus ultimately gave. We're called to these various things during Lent through our readings to focus on, to refocus who we are, what we are called to be. A people of love for others, willing to sacrifice for them. Never enough to bring redemption to them or to ourselves, but a reflection of the ultimate sacrifice of Christ. For us, one day we will pass through death, just as Jesus did. And in our gospel reading today, we are giving a sign of what we will be like. Transfigured, totally changed, radiant. All words we hear in Scripture. If we truly live our sacrificial life. Are we up for the challenge? Are we ready to do that so ultimately we can share in what God has ready for us? He has a plan. It's in place. All we need to do is respond with our life. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth,